Richard Cole fired the quietest man in the building at 4:47 on a Friday afternoon, on the man's daughter's 7th birthday, and by Saturday morning Richard Cole no longer owned the company he'd fired him from. He didn't know that yet. Nobody did. Except, maybe, a dead man. It had been an ordinary Friday in Maple Run, Vermont, the kind of October day where the cold hadn't committed yet, where wood smoke drifted off the ridge and the maples along Route 12 burned orange against a grey sky. At Harrow Precision Components, the machines had been running since 6, and at Bay 4, at the oldest lathe on the floor, stood Daniel Merritt, 39 years old, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands scarred and steady, checking a turbine coupling against a micrometer for the 3rd time. The reading was wrong. Not wrong the way a worn tool goes wrong the way paperwork goes wrong. The spec sheet taped to the job traveller said the part had passed final inspection 2 days ago. Daniel had ground this alloy for 11 years. He knew what a passing part felt like under his fingers, and this one didn't. He set it down, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and looked at the traveller again. Inspection stamp JR, except Jimmy Ray's had been out with a broken wrist since September. Somebody had stamped a part Jimmy never touched. Daniel didn't say anything. That was his way. Men on the floor joked that Dan Merritt spoke about 40 words a day, and 30 of them were about tolerances. He slid the traveller into his jacket pocket, finished his shift, and clocked out at 4:30 because tonight was Ellie's birthday, 7 years old. She'd asked for one thing, pancakes for dinner and her dad home before dark. He almost made it to his truck. Merritt. The voice came across the parking lot, smooth as poured concrete. Richard Cole, CEO of Harrow Precision for the past 3 years, stood by the door in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than Daniel's Ford. Beside him stood Vance Kessler, the operations director, a man with a politician's smile and a habit of standing slightly behind whoever held the power. "Got a minute?" Cole said. It wasn't a question. Inside the front office, the conversation took 4 minutes. Cole did the talking. Restructuring. Efficiency review. Redundancies at the machinist level. He slid a manila envelope across the desk. 2 weeks severance, a release form, a pen already uncapped. Effective immediately, Cole said. Security will walk you out. Daniel looked at the envelope, then at Kessler, who was studying the window like the parking lot was fascinating. Then back at Cole. Bay 4 sent a coupling to final with the dead man's initials on it, Daniel said quietly. You might want to look into that before those parts ship to Denver. Something moved behind Cole's eyes. Fast, then gone. Sign the form, Mr. Merritt. Daniel didn't sign. He stood, left the envelope on the desk, and walked out past the security guard, who looked at his shoes and mumbled, Sorry, Dan. 11 years. He carried out one cardboard box, a coffee thermos, a photo of Ellie missing her front teeth, and a pair of calipers his father had given him in 1998. The traveller stayed folded in his jacket pocket. Cole never asked for it back. That was Cole's first mistake. His second mistake was assuming Daniel Merritt was exactly what he looked like. At home, a white farmhouse on Kestrel Road with a sagging porch and a tire swing, Ellie was waiting at the window. Daniel left the box in the truck. He walked in with his hands empty and his face arranged, and he made pancakes shaped like lopsided stars, and he lit 7 candles on a stack of them. And when Ellie asked why his eyes looked tired, he said, Because you're getting old, kiddo. It's aging me. She laughed. He sang. She blew out the candles and wished she wouldn't say for what. After she fell asleep, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he opened a drawer that hadn't been opened in 3 years, under the phone book and the dead batteries, and took out a business card, soft at the corners. A Boston number. A name, Margaret Osei, attorney at law. Below it, in a shaky hand that had once been strong, someone had written 5 words in blue ink, when it's time. E.H. Daniel turned the card over twice. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches. Somewhere across town, in a glass-walled house on the ridge, Richard Cole was pouring a drink and telling Vance Kessler the problem was handled. Daniel picked up the phone. It rang once. Osei, said a woman's voice, wide awake at 9:40 p.m., as if she'd been waiting 3 years for this exact call. This is Daniel Merritt, he said. Elias told me to call you when it was time. A pause. the sound of a chair rolling, a drawer opening. Papers, Mr. Merritt, Margaret O'Shea said. Do you know what you have? No, ma'am. Then I suggest you sit down. To understand what happened next, you have to go back 3 years, to a hospital room in Burlington that smelled like antiseptic and cut flowers, where Elias Harrow, founder of Harrow Precision, 81 years old, dying of the thing he'd refused to name out loud, asked the nurses to send everyone away except a machinist named Dan. Nobody at the company had understood their friendship. The old man and the quiet one. It had started 12 years earlier, when Daniel walked in for an interview with grease under his nails, and a resume he refused to talk about, and Elias, who read people the way Daniel read metal, hired him in 9 minutes. It grew over years of Saturday mornings, the two of them alone on the floor, tuning machines nobody else was allowed to touch. Elias did the talking. Daniel did the listening. Twice a month, Ellie came too, and the old man taught her checkers on an upturned crate and let her win exactly half the time, because, he said, a person should know both feelings. What almost nobody knew, not the board, not Richard Cole, who was then a rising executive with clean fingernails and cleaner numbers, was that Elias Harrow had watched Cole for 2 years and quietly concluded that the man was a liar with excellent posture. He couldn't prove it. He was running out of time to try. So he did something old-fashioned instead. He put a lock on the door and hid the key in the last place a thief would look. In that hospital room, Elias pressed the business card into Daniel's hand. I'm leaving the company to the board and the shareholders like everyone expects, the old man said. Cole will end up running it, probably ruin it slow so nobody notices. But there's a piece I kept back, Dan, a piece nobody's mapped. His grip tightened. If a day comes when they've rotted it through, you'll know that day when you see it. You call Margaret. Not before. Promise me. Not before, Daniel promised. 2 weeks later, Elias was gone. At the funeral, Richard Cole gave a beautiful eulogy about legacy and stewardship. Daniel stood at the back, holding his daughter's hand, and said nothing, which everyone assumed was grief, and only partly was. 3 years, the card sat in a drawer. For 3 years, Daniel watched the company change. Good men squeezed out, corners rounded off, inspection times cut, and told himself it wasn't the day yet. He needed the job. He had a girl to raise alone. Sarah had been gone since Ellie was 2, a winter road and a phone call he still couldn't think about straight. He kept his head down. He held tolerances. He waited. Then a coupling with a dead man's initials came across his bench, bound for an aerospace contract in Denver, and Richard Cole fired him within 4 hours of him mentioning it. That was the day, Saturday morning, 7:15. Margaret O'Shea's Audi came up Kestrel Road through the fog and parked behind Daniel's truck. She was 60, silver-haired, dressed like she was arguing before a judge at 8, and gardening by noon. She carried 1 leather portfolio and declined coffee. Then changed her mind when she smelled it. At the kitchen table, Ellie at the counter, absorbed in cartoons and cereal, Margaret laid out the papers like a dealer laying out a hand she already knew was winning. Elias Harrow restructured his estate 14 months before he died, she said. Publicly, his shares went into the Harrow Family Trust, administered by the board. That's what everyone sees. What they don't see is that the trust was built with a keystone, a separate instrument, 11% of company stock held in a blind entity called Kestrel Holdings. She glanced up. He named it after your road, Mr. Merritt, with transfer conditioned on a single trigger. What trigger? Your involuntary termination from Harrow Precision for any reason other than documented gross misconduct. She let that sit. Elias's theory was simple. He told me, the day they fire Dan Merritt is the day the rot has reached the good wood. He built the entire mechanism around you as the tripwire. You were fired at 4:47 yesterday. Kestrel Holdings activated at 4:48. Daniel stared at her. In the living room, a cartoon dog said something, and Ellie laughed. 11% doesn't take a company, he said finally. No, Margaret agreed. By itself, it doesn't. She slid a second document across the table. Which is why Elias spent his last year quietly arranging option agreements with 3 of the original shareholders, old friends, People who trusted him more than they'll ever trust Richard Cole. Standing offers, priced and signed, exercisable only by Kestrel Holdings, only upon activation. I made the calls last night. She looked at him over her reading glasses. As of 6002 this morning, Mr. Merritt, Kestrel Holdings controls 52% of Harrow Precision Components, and you control Kestrel Holdings. The refrigerator hummed. Fog pressed against the window over the sink. There's a board meeting Monday, Margaret continued, when it was clear Daniel couldn't speak yet. Cole scheduled it himself. He's pushing through a vote to accelerate the Denver shipment timeline. He doesn't know the ground has moved under him. The ownership filings will process this morning, but notices won't formally reach the board before Monday. You could walk into that room and end him in 90 seconds. But, Daniel said, because her voice had a but in it. But. Margaret took off her glasses. You told me on the phone about the traveller. The forged inspection stamp. Mr. Merritt, if Harrow is shipping uncertified components for aircraft engines, ownership is the smaller problem. Someone is signing off on parts that could fail at 30,000 feet. If you take the company Monday and it comes out later, it comes out on you. She tapped the table once. We need to know how deep it goes before you show your hand. What was falsified, who ordered it, and where the real inspection records went. Daniel looked out the window at the fog, at the tire swing turning slowly in the wind. 11 years he'd kept his head down. Elias had known, had counted on, exactly the kind of man he was. There's a woman in quality assurance, he said slowly. Nadia Brooks. Jimmy Race's supervisor. She flagged inspection irregularities in August, filed it in writing. He paused. Cole moved her to the night shift a week later. Everyone understood the message. Will she talk to you? Maybe. Daniel rubbed his thumb across the old calipers on the table, a habit he didn't notice himself doing. She kept copies. That's the rumour. Kessler tore her office apart in September looking for something, said it was an audit. Margaret O'Say smiled for the first time that morning, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who has just seen the whole board. Then we have until Monday morning, she said, to find what Vance Kessler couldn't, what none of them knew. Not Daniel, not Margaret, not Nadia Brooks working her exile shift among the humming machines, was that at that exact moment, across town in the glass house on the ridge, Richard Cole's phone was lighting up with a call from his broker in Boston, a man who was paid to notice unusual movements in privately held stock. Cole listened for 30 seconds. His face went from irritation to attention to something much colder. Say that name again, he said. Kestrel Holdings, the broker said. It didn't exist Friday afternoon. It exists now. And Richard, it's been buying. Cole stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the valley, at the fog, at the little white farmhouse he didn't know he was looking at, on a road he didn't know had a name worth remembering. Find out who's behind it, he said. Today. And get me Kessler, because Richard Cole had a shipment leaving for Denver in 6 days, records that needed to stay buried, and a sudden, crawling feeling that the quiet man he'd fired on Friday had not, in fact, been handled at all. Sunday came in grey and cold, and by then Richard Cole knew 3 things. He knew Kestrel Holdings had closed on option agreements with 3 original shareholders. He knew the paperwork trail dead-ended in a Boston law office that wasn't returning calls. And he knew, with the instinct of a man who had climbed over better people his whole life, that all of it smelled like the old man, like Elias Harrow reaching up out of the ground with one more move nobody had seen. What he didn't know was the name behind the entity. Not yet. And so, on Sunday morning, while Daniel Merritt stood at a stove making eggs for a 7-year-old, Cole did what frightened men with money do. He started burning things. The August file, he told Kessler, pacing the length of his study. The Brooks complaint, the inspection logs, all of it. If it's paper, it's gone by tonight. If it's digital, it never syncs. Kessler shifted his weight. The logs feed the Federal Compliance Archive. If Denver's parts get audited and our records don't match, then make them match. Cole stopped pacing. You stamped those travellers, Vance. Your idea, your shortcut, your dead man's initials. I just approved a schedule. He smiled without any warmth in it. Remember which one of us that distinction protects. Kessler went pale under his golf tan. That was the moment, though neither man marked it, that the partnership began to die. A conspiracy is only as strong as its most frightened member, and Vance Kessler had just been shown his place in the lifeboat. Across town, Daniel drove Ellie to her grandmother's, Sarah's mother, June, who lived above the yarn shop on Main and asked no questions when Daniel said he had errands, though her eyes said she knew errands didn't make a man's jaw look like that. Ellie kissed his cheek and told him, with the fierce authority of a person newly 7, "Don't be sad on my birthday weekend, it's a rule." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said, and meant it, driving away more than she would know for years. He found Nadia Brooks at the end of her shift, in the gravel lot behind the plant where the night crew parked, scraping frost off the windshield of a Subaru with a plastic dustpan, because her scraper had snapped in September and she kept forgetting to buy another. She was 41, dark-eyed, wary, with the posture of a person who had learned the hard way that doing your job well could be a firing offence. She saw Daniel coming across the lot and stopped scraping. "They walked you out Friday," she said. "Whole floor's talking about it. You should not be here, Dan." "Probably not." He stopped a respectful distance away, hands in his jacket pockets. "You flagged the inspection logs in August. In writing." Her face closed like a door. "I flagged a clerical discrepancy. It was resolved. You got moved tonight and Kessler tore your office apart." Daniel took the folded traveller out of his pocket and held it up. "Jimmy Race's initials. Stamp Wednesday." Jimmy's been in a cast since Labor Day. He watched her eyes go to the paper and stay there. "Those couplings ship to Denver on Thursday, Nadia. They go into engines." The lot was quiet except for the hum of the building behind them, the sound of machines running, of parts being made, of a thing they had both given years of their lives to. "I have a mortgage," Nadia said quietly. "I have a kid in his second year at UVM. You know what coal does to people. I know what he did to me." Daniel put the traveller back in his pocket. "And I know you kept copies. Everybody knows. It's why they moved you where they could watch you. It's why Kessler's still looking." He paused. "They're going to find them eventually. The only question is whether they find them before somebody who can use them does." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Frost melted in a slow line down the windshield between them. "Why you?" she said finally. "You're a machinist. You got fired. What can you possibly do with any of it?" Daniel considered how to answer that. Margaret had told him to say nothing about Kestrel until Monday. But Elias had taught him something too, on those long Saturday mornings, that trust is a machined fit. You don't get it by forcing the parts. "Tomorrow morning at 9 there's a board meeting," he said. "I'm going to be in that room. I can't tell you why yet. But I'm asking you to trust that when I say what Cole did will not survive the week, I'm not guessing." He held her gaze. "Elias hired you, didn't he? 19 years ago." "Elias hired you, didn't he? 19 years ago." 20, Nadia said. Her voice caught very slightly on the word. "He hired me too. He had a saying about the two of us, actually." Daniel almost smiled. "Said we were the only people in the building who'd rather be right than like." Something in her face shifted. Not trust yet, but the beginning of the possibility of it. She looked back at the building, at the lit windows of the floor where she'd spent half her life, and then she reached a decision the way careful people do, all at once, after a very long time. "Not here," she said. "There's a diner in Bar, the Copper Kettle, off Route 62. 1 hour." She got into the Subaru, then rolled the window down. "And Dan, it's worse than the Traveller. It's not one part and it's not one shipment." She looked at him with 19 years of exhaustion. "Bring coffee money. This is going to take a while." What she spread across the back booth of the Copper Kettle an hour later, from a shoebox that had been living in a storage unit in Montpelier under her sister's name, was the whole anatomy of it. Original inspection logs, side by side with the altered versions, 41 components over 14 months, stamped as passed when they'd failed or never been tested at all. Internal emails she printed the week before her access was quietly narrowed. Kessler ordering inspection windows cut, Cole approving schedules that made honest inspection mathematically impossible, and one document Daniel read 3 times, a memo Cole to Kessler, 4 sentences long, ending with the phrase, "Keep the Denver timeline whole at any cost. The penalties for delay are real. The audit risk is theoretical." He wrote it down, Daniel said quietly. Arrogant men always do. Nadia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The margin call is what started it. Cole leveraged the company 2 years ago to buy out a competitor, and the deal went bad, and the Denver contract penalties would have sunk him. So the schedule became God, and the schedule couldn't survive real inspections. She looked up. I did the math one night and couldn't sleep after. Statistically, most of those parts are probably fine. But probably fine is not a word you get to use about an aircraft engine, Dan. That's the whole reason our jobs exist. Daniel called Margaret from the diner's parking lot. She listened without interrupting, which he would learn was her highest form of excitement. Photograph everything tonight, chain of custody notes, and get me the originals by 7 a.m., she said. And Daniel, this stopped being a boardroom matter the moment there's a live shipment. First thing tomorrow before the meeting, I'm making a call to the FAA hotline and one to a contact at the Bureau's Albany field office. The board meeting is where we take the company. The federal call is where we stop the truck. A pause and something almost gentle came into her voice. Elias used to say you'd know the day when you saw it. He'd want to know you saw it in time. Monday morning arrived clear and hard, the first real frost of the year silvering the fields along Route 12. At 8:40, Richard Cole stood at the head of the third-floor boardroom checking his cufflinks, feeling better than he had all weekend. His broker had finally traced Kestrel's registered agent to a retired attorney in Boston, O.C., some estate law dinosaur from Harrow's era. And Cole had convinced himself it was a nuisance move, some sentimental trust maneuver, 11 stray % that a good legal team would tie up in probate, court for a decade. He had a plan for the meeting. Accelerate Denver, book the contract revenue, refinance off the strength of it, and be unassailable by spring. At 8:52 the elevator opened and the plan died. Margaret O.C. came first, in courtroom grey, carrying the leather portfolio. Behind her came Nadia Brooks, chin level, carrying nothing, which was its own kind of statement, because everything she had was already elsewhere, and behind them, in a pressed shirt and his good jacket, in boots that were clean but were undeniably work boots, came Daniel Merritt. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms do when everyone realizes at once that the agenda is fiction. This is a closed meeting, Cole said. Mr. Merritt is not an employee of this company. No, Margaret agreed pleasantly, setting the portfolio on the table. He's the owner of it. She dealt the documents around the table like the winning hand it was. The Kestrel instrument, the trigger clause with Friday's termination paperwork, signed by Cole himself, attached as the activating event. The exercised options, notarized and filed. The tabulation at the end, simple enough for anyone, 52%. For the record, Margaret said, as of 6:02 Saturday morning, Kestrel Holdings is the majority shareholder of Harrow Precision Components, and Mr. Daniel Merritt is the sole beneficial owner of Kestrel Holdings under an instrument executed by Elias Harrow and validated by 2 independent trustees. The filings are complete. This is not a claim we are asserting, gentlemen. It is arithmetic that has already occurred. The oldest board member, Frank Delacroix, who had known Elias 50 years, read the trigger clause twice and began, very quietly, to laugh, the laugh of a man watching an old friend win a chess game from inside a coffin. Cole did not laugh. Cole was reading the termination clause with the expression of a man understanding in real time that he had personally pulled the pin. This is a trust gimmick. A conditional transfer built on my staffing decision, no court. Elias anticipated that argument, Margaret said. Page 9. You'll find the condition was reviewed pre-mortem by 2 firms and structured as an option trigger, not a penalty. Courts enforce those every day. But please, litigate. Discovery is a wonderful process. She smiled her cold smile. It surfaces everything. And on that word, as if the sentence had been machined to receive it, Daniel spoke for the first time. Denver, he said. He laid the traveller on the table. The coupling, the dead man's initials. And then Nadia stepped forward and, in a level voice that did not shake even once, walked the board through the shoebox. The parallel logs, 41 components. The narrowed access. The memo. When she read the phrase, the audit risk is theoretical aloud, Two board members physically turned to look at Cole, and Kessler, standing by the window, made a small sound like a man stepping on ice and hearing it crack. "As of 8:15 this morning," Margaret said, "certified copies of these records are with the FAA and the FBI's Albany field office. The Denver shipment will not leave the dock Thursday. Federal investigators will likely be in this building by Wednesday." She folded her hands. "The only decision remaining to this board is whether it wants to be found cooperating or complicit." The vote to remove Richard Cole as chief executive took 4 minutes. He did not stay for all of them. He stood, buttoned his jacket with hands that were no longer quite steady, and paused at the door to look at Daniel, really look at him, maybe for the first time. "Friday afternoon," Cole said. "You knew. You sat there and you already knew." "No," Daniel said. "Friday afternoon I only knew the part was bad." He held Cole's stare, calm as a level line. "You're the one who knew what firing me would cost. Elias just made sure you'd pay it. The federal part took months, the way federal things do. But it went the way it goes when the paper is good, Kessler. Shown the memo with his name on the distribution line. Cooperated by Thanksgiving. The Denver components were recalled and retested. Most passed, 11 did not, and one of the 11, an engineer testified, had a fatigue flaw that would likely have propagated within 4,000 flight hours. Nobody had been hurt. Everybody understood how close nobody had come. Cole was indicted in February on federal fraud and falsification charges. His lawyers negotiated through spring, and in the end he stood in a Burlington courtroom and said the word guilty in a voice nothing like the one he'd used in eulogies. The house on the ridge sold in June to pay the fines. Harrow Precision survived, which surprised the business press and no one on the floor. Daniel refused the CEO title. "I'd be terrible at it, and I'd know it, which is worse," and instead installed a president recommended by Frank Delacroix, took the board chair Elias's instrument had built for him, and made 2 appointments his first morning. Jimmy Reyes came back with his healed wrist as floor supervisor, and Nadia Brooks became vice president of quality with a clause written into the bylaws. Daniel drafted it himself in pencil and made Margaret clean up the language, that no inspection authority at Harrow could ever again report to the person who owned the schedule. He kept working Bay 2 days a week. The board found this eccentric. The floor found it exactly right. On a Saturday in May, when the valley had gone green again, Daniel brought Ellie to the plant the way Elias had once let him bring her, and she set up the checkerboard on the same upturned crate, and Nadia, who had started coming in Saturdays too, because some habits of care don't switch off, got beaten twice in a row by a 7-year-old and demanded a rematch with a seriousness that made Daniel laugh out loud, a sound Nadia realized she had never heard before and found, privately, that she wanted to hear again. Later, the 3 of them sat on the loading dock with sandwiches, boots hanging over the edge, the mountains soft and blue in the distance. Ellie fell asleep against her father's arm mid-sentence, the way kids do, like a switch thrown. The afternoon held still. "He knew," Nadia said quietly, looking out of the ridge. "Elias. All of it. He knew Cole would rot the place, and he knew they'd come for people like us eventually, and he knew that when they came for you, that'd be the proof." She shook her head slowly. "He turned your firing into the tripwire. That's the strangest inheritance I've ever heard of. He left the company to a trust, and the truth to a machinist," Daniel said. He knew which one he could count on. Nadia smiled at that, and looked down at the dock between them, where his hand rested on the sun-warmed concrete, calloused and still, and hers came to rest a few inches away, close enough that neither of them moved for a long while, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them noticed. Below the dock, in the visitor spot nobody had ever repainted, sat the old Ford, and beyond it the road home, and above the office door. Daniel's one indulgence as chairman, machined on Bay 4 from a single billet of aircraft-grade aluminum, polished to a soft shine, hung a small plaque bearing 5 words in a plain, honest font, "When it's time." E.H. Ellie stirred against his arm, half woke, and asked what time it was. "Time to go home, kiddo," Daniel said, and they did.